I've sort of settled down slightly, but I mean, I was following this all day, kind of watching the ship on a tracker, and I did sort of start to think that are we closer to kind of a global diplomatic incident than we have been for a while?
I think we are, and that is because Russia claimed the ship. Whether they lawfully claimed the ship or not, they did. And so it probably is owned by Russia, right? I mean, I think that's the one thing that everybody can probably agree on with Russia. So it really does come to because they've made it open and they made it public. They'll likely have to do something in response. If they don't, then from the power standpoint, they've lost considerable power. So whether that would be direct military action, I don't think so. Whether they'll pull out of any discussions on the future of Ukraine, plausible. They're looking to do that anyway. They've never really gainfully been involved in any serious discussions on ceasefire in Ukraine. I think it was simply to delay the consequences for their participation at all. But they could do that. And they could also, there's other things that they could potentially do that they don't think would bring them into direct military conflict with the U.S. military, which obviously wouldn't be in their interest.
We've That's pretty much all we know on that at the moment, but we will keep everyone updated on Times Radio as the situation progresses. Now, originally we were going to talk about Greenland this morning, so we'll move on to that now if we've got a bit of time. We've spent the last sort of few days on the Trump report speculating on just how serious the president is about acquiring Greenland. Last night, the White House made it quite publicly clear that they are serious.
They did, and that's really shocked many. I mean, I think uh, not only in Congress, but across the nation of the United States, they would never want to view the United States as such a poor ally that they would actually threaten to use military force to seize territory that is not theirs, that's from an ally. I mean, it would be one thing, also bad, to seize territory anywhere from anyone that's not yours. But to do it against a NATO ally is just, to many on both sides of the aisle, unconscionable to even be considering it. I don't think it would happen. I don't think the acquisition, if you want to put it that way, of or the annexation of Greenland will ever happen. It has to be approved by Denmark. It has to be approved by Greenland. It would have to be a treaty. It'd have to be negotiated. It would have to be ratified by the U.S. Senate, and all of the expenses, which would be considerable, would have to be approved by the U.S. House of Representatives. I don't think there's support for any of that by any party in either of those bodies. And then, of course, if it's not done by the end of this term, I have never heard of another politician on either side of the aisle who's talked about buying Greenland. So this could be just for this term and then completely be awashed. I mean, literally, and I don't think there's any chance we'd use military force, but say we did and bypassed all the diplomatic efforts, I do believe the next president would essentially give it back to Denmark. And this would be a bizarre chapter in world history. I just don't think it's going that way. I'm not sure why we're even talking about it. I think it's becoming very difficult for the allies of this administration to even come up with a defense of this at all. Yes, it is strategically important. Everybody knows that. But if it was that strategically important, the United States wouldn't have pulled a vast majority of the forces that we had there during the Cold War. And Greenland has offered to allow them to come back. So if that was the case, why aren't we sending our forces? And the reason, Fergus, why it is so important is any kind of ICBM attack by Russia to the United States would essentially, most of it, go over Greenland. That's why we're there in the Cold War. And you want to be able to shoot what they call the apogee, which is like the top of the trajectory of the weapon coming our way, and it's right under Greenland. So if it was that big of a concern, we would have already sent our forces back because Greenland is like open door. Yes, so that's if that was the case, why aren't we there?
I might, yeah, I might be adding two and two together and getting five here as well. But if that is true, as you say, the national security concerns, could you not make the argument that any country, the UK, could also claim, okay, then we'll take Greenland for the same reason?
Of course, yes, absolutely. Or NATO in general. Like, why isn't a NATO? And it has been, and it is in NATO. So, like, I think it's very perplexing to our NATO allies who, even if Greenland, for whatever reason, decided that they didn't want the U.S. military to come there, that's their prerogative. but at least there could be an internal debate inside NATO of the importance, and maybe we can talk Greenland into it, etc., Denmark into it. But the idea that Denmark and Greenland are like, send your forces. Like, what are you waiting for? If it's that important, why aren't they here? And that's a legitimate question. So that makes it, to many, this isn't really about that. It's more about economic exploitation of the resources that are now more accessible in the Arctic because of the, basically the ice melting and the climate change that's going on there. But even that, according to public reporting and statements by officials in Denmark and Greenland, they're totally open for the United States industries to come and help and look for, these new resources which are becoming available. So it's very unclear. There's not a restriction on us, although this rhetoric could make a restriction. I mean, if you were the prime minister of Greenland or the leadership in Denmark, how keen would you be to allow U.S. military forces in now that we've claimed that we want it, right? We could actually, by this rhetoric, which I don't think is going to go anywhere, actually be hurting the very reasons why we say we need it, which is we could send our military force, we could have U.S. Industry going there, but they might think twice about that now, based on our stated intention to annex the territory.
And someone we've spoken about over the last few days who seems to maybe privately be doing things slightly differently from what Donald Trump has publicly said is Marco Rubio. And there was a report that I think I saw you retweet and I read it as well overnight that supposedly he had said privately to lawmakers they were seriously considering buying it. I mean, is that just Rubio briefing, or do you think that actually is serious?
Well, he's probably right. I mean, that the U.S. is, at least the White House, is considering buying it. Now, let's remember, I mean, Secretary Rubio has had a long history in the Senate, in the intelligence community, working with foreign policy. I have never heard anybody there talk about doing this. So the chances that he supports this, other than the fact that he's currently the Secretary of State, are very slim, right? I mean, you don't go from your whole career never talking about this as a necessity to going, the U.S. needs to buy Greenland right now. But he is ultimately the secretary for President Trump. So I expect him to figure out how this would be done. And I think he's trying to simmer the concerns in the Senate about the idea that we want to do this at all, but certainly use military force. If military force is actually on the table under the War Powers Act, the United States Senate could stop it. They don't have to wait 60 days under the act to then say no more. They can preemptively say the action that you're preparing to do is not supported by the Senate, and they can cut off all funding for doing it. So the idea that we'd use military force, against everything the U.S. has stood for its existence, is also very unlikely because the Senate is not going to support it, and they have the ability under that act to essentially stop it from happening in the first place.